I'm not too sure where Ollie is. Peter Francis's witness statement, it's at UCPI 36012. Page 154, please. At paragraph 989. He'd previously referred to this earlier in his statement as a sexual indiscretion, saying that you had not passed the back office posting due to a rumour about sexual indiscretion. And here at paragraph 989, he says that I was aware that during his back office tour in preparation for deployment into the field, he had been caught having sex in circumstances which meant he ultimately did not deploy. In terms of that, you've obviously given your account as to what happened during your back office deployment, but he goes on to say that when you were the DCI of the SDS, you made a comment to the UCOs about all this shagging going on, and yet I wasn't allowed to go out because I had sex with one person. As to that, what do you say as to whether you did make those comments or something along those lines to the UCOs under your management?
Well, let me first touch on the fact that he says that I was caught having sex in circumstances which meant I could not ultimately be deployed.
But Mr. Edmondson, if you prefer, we are going to have a private session on that later on this afternoon if you want to go.
But this is an open session.
This is open.
So I would like just to answer at least that one point.
Of course, yes, of course you may.
Absolutely. There was never been a suggestion, other than by Peter Francis, that I was caught having sex in circumstances that he's describing. Utterly untrue. And had they been true, my vetting would have lapsed straight away. This is an utter fabrication. And I wish that to be stated clearly. Or I state it clearly. Now, going on to that latter part, people who know me know the sort of person that I am, and there is no way that I would ever have uttered those words. I find it appalling that he's even allowed to say such things. Of course, it's his statement, but he's a fantalist. I'm sorry, I really do not, I just cannot abide the fact that he's allowed to say such things. That is not me, and I would never have said those things.
Were you aware at all that there may have been a rumour, whether correct or not, as to why you didn't deploy back in 1980? As
far as I knew, people realised that I'd been seen going to lunch with somebody. I know of no other rumours.
Mr. Edmondson, you recognise why it's important to explore this issue, given that effectively somebody that was prevented from deploying into the field as the UCO was then later put in charge of a small policing unit where there were officers, some of whom were having sex in their undercover identities, and it's that engaging in inappropriate sexual relationships on duty that then becomes a serious issue about judgment, and that is why this has become an issue in relation to your management. Do you recognise that?
I can understand the way that I've seen the inquiry being undertaken, and I do understand that there are considerations about people having sex while undercover. I do accept that.
And it would be a serious matter of judgment for a manager to be able to manage those officers, and if there was something in their background that made them have inappropriate sexual liaisons. I'm not saying that's true at all, but the allegation is there. That would be something that would have to be taken into consideration when putting you in that position as manager. Do you accept that?
If that had been the case, I can understand you raising it in that way. But I reiterate, I never had the sex in the way that he is describing it at all. And certainly the use of that language is not me.
Were you capable of recognising that your officers' behaviour fell way below what was expected of them as police officers when you were a manager?
No.
Let me rephrase that. Were you a person, given your ethical judgment, that could recognise poor behaviour in other officers?
If there'd been such poor behaviour and it had come to my notice or I had suspected it, then I can understand you asking it in that way. But
were you capable of recognising that officers' behaviours, where they're engaging in sexual relationships undercover, was wrong?
I'd have been capable of recognising that, yes.
Were you capable of recognising that that sort of behaviour amounted to abuse of innocent members of the public?
Until this inquiry, I've never thought about it in that way as abuse.
Do you accept the Commissioner's position that sexual relationships undercover that some of your officers conducted were abusive, deceitful, manipulative and wrong?
In the way that the Commissioner has described it, then I will accept his statement.
Knowing what you do know now about the behaviours of the officers that you were managing in the 1990s, do you recognise it and accept that it was abusive behaviour?
I have to say, I don't recognise it as being abusive. I'm sorry, I don't recognise that terminology. I would say, yes, it's wrong. But I think what I'm trying to put myself back into thinking about this is that we asked a lot of our officers to go into deep undercover. And that meant leading undercover lives that were normal for ordinary people. And therefore I think we probably put them into a position that made it difficult for some of them to avoid some sort of close liaison. One officer, and his HN1 once said to me, one of the worst things he'd had to deal with was the fact that he had become great friends with people and that he felt that he was betraying friendships. And I think that's what a lot of officers probably felt. They were getting very close to people who had causes that were understandable. And to get close to them, they had to form relationships, friendships. And that's the way I've always thought about this in respect to managing the officers.
And when you say you expected them to play their role, have a normal life in their undercover role, was sex a part of the normal life of a young 32-year-old, early 30s, late 20s, some of them pretending to be early 20s? Sex would be a normal part of their undercover persona, wouldn't it?
I'm not saying sex would have been part of it, but certainly I'm saying that they were put in very difficult positions and were getting close to people. Personal relationships, chemistry between people does come into this. But I think what you're also asking of me is, were those relationships condoned? And that's certainly not the case.
In terms of the close relationships, the chemistry between people, it had to be recognised realistically, didn't it, that these predominantly young men, in the groups that they were infiltrating, would be seen by their group as normal if they were engaging in sexual relationships.
Again, I can only say that that's what a lot of officers had difficulty with in trying to maintain their undercover in such circumstances. But it doesn't mean to say that they were engaging in sexual activity.
Is it highly likely that that would be a part of their undercover persona?
Not their persona, no. I wouldn't say that it was.
I'm trying to understand what you were thinking as a manager at the time in terms of you're asking them to live the life of this undercover person, live a normal life. You're putting them into a situation where they are forming very close friendships. Those friendships develop, don't they, particularly over the times that they're being deployed for. They're not deployed for a short period of time, they're deployed for years. Is it to be expected that there will be a really high chance of sex becoming a part of that deployment?
Having looked and listened to some of the things that have been said, it's clear that some officers were put into that invidious position and perhaps felt that they had to engage in some form of activity. But it's not something I believe that they were wanting to do in any way.
Did you recognise that at the time?
You'll have to forgive me, this is a long time ago now. I'd rather think about it and hopefully help you in some way, in the way that our managing system worked, and the way in which we would, on a very regular basis, I mean it is very regular, every day these officers would be spoken to by somebody, mostly the sergeants when they phoned in. And every day we would be discussing them. Literally every day we would say, how is so-and-so? Any thoughts about that? Anything that's different? And I would have hoped at that point that we might have picked up on any issues that might be affecting them in that way. Any reporting that might have come to us from different quarters. But I don't recognise that there was that reporting. So yes, officers were put into a very difficult position. And yes, we were asking them to do a lot in relation to working closely with organisations and infiltrating them. So friendships were formed. Did I think that they would be sexual relationships? I don't believe at the time, when I was a manager, that I did.
Do you recognise that you should have recognised that that was a likelihood?
In hindsight, I perhaps somehow should have tried to find out. But I'm going back to what I said. We took great care over the way that we talked about and thought about each officer and the work that they were doing and the effects on them. So in hindsight now, you might say I should have given thought to them having had sexual relationships. I didn't at the time.
Is your evidence that you should have at the time? With hindsight, should you have given thought to the chance of them those friendships forming into sexual relationships?
In hindsight.
Mr. Edmondson, I want to have a look at what those relationships were in a little bit more detail later on. But first, I just want to go back to the chronology of where you were prior to coming into the SDS as a manager. So as I understand it, that once you left the SDS back office in July 1980, having spent those 4 months in the back office, you then transferred back into B squad and protection duties. Then you had that year in Hampstead where you were a relief inspector. And then you went back to special branch and you spent time in B squad, S squad, and briefly in C squad. You say that while you were in B squad, you recall one particular incident where you were in receipt of SDS intelligence that suggested that some members of the Troops Out movement were to disrupt a high-profile event on Horse Guards Road by running into the marching parade, and that was on the eve of the Trooping of the Colour. And with that intel, you and a few B Squad colleagues went into the crowd in plain clothes, and you pointed out one of the men, a senior member of Tom. Do you recall that incident? And as a result, you say that event went off without disruption. And you use that as an example of valuable SDS reporting from your perspective as a customer in B Squad. Do you recall that?
I do. This was, you've mentioned it's the evening of of Trooping the Colour. I think it's a specific ceremony called Beating Retreat, and it takes place on Horse Guard Parade. And the intelligence that I was given was that certain members of the Troops Out movement were prepared to disrupt that ceremony by jumping the barriers onto Horse Guards and disrupting the actual event. I, at that time, was on what was called the Troops Out movement and INLA, Irish National Liberation Army desk, and therefore I identified, I knew the people involved in Troops Out movement, and with that intelligence I went with colleagues into the crowd, and I identified a particular senior member of, or leading member of Tom, and pointed him out, and all I can tell you then is that that person, as far as I'm aware, was restrained, and therefore that disruption didn't take place.
Okay, so that man that you identified, he was arrested?
I'm sorry, I can't answer that. I just know that the event, the disruption did not take place. Had
he been in the process of disrupting, or had he taken any action at that stage?
As far as I'm aware, by pointing him out, the uniform officers who were involved probably just approached him and pulled him away from the barriers, as far as I'm aware. I can't help you any more in relation to what happened after I'd identified him.
And you can't recall the name of the SDS officer who provided the information? It's at paragraph 21 of your witness statement, but I don't think you can recall who the source of that intelligence was.
Whoever was on. No, I'm sorry.
And you can't recall the date of that intelligence, is that right? And how can you be sure that that was valuable intelligence that prevented a disruption?
Well, I think an event like Beating the Retreat, which as far as I know is televised, but irrespective of that, it's quite a major ceremonial event. And I know that identifying him prevented that disruption taking place. And I think the importance of that is clear.
And how did you know the SDS intel was accurate, that they were intending to disrupt?
Well, I'm just thinking here that the officer who would have told me that, or it would have come from the officer, I somehow think it was the officer himself, which is unusual, but I've got a feeling it was the officer. And he would have been part of the infiltration of that activity.
In 1989, you had a police service and good conduct medal presented to you. Is that right?
That's correct.
And in 1990, you were promoted to DCI. From November 1990, you took charge of the Irish Research Unit. Is that right?
That's correct.
In your witness statement, you can't recall exactly what you did between that, the Irish Research Unit, and joining the SDS as a manager in April 1994, if you had another role. And I'm just wanting to refer you to a few documents to try and assist you with that.
Sorry, could I just help? Well, perhaps just come in there. I was thinking about this only because something was put to me. It seems that I was certainly in the Irish Research Unit as a DCI, but I think a document might indicate that I was on C Squad for a short period prior to then going to SDS.
The inquiry understands that in September 92, C Squad merged with E Squad, forming CE Squad. Do you recall that happening?
I don't recall that. I've seen something now that says CE, but I'm assuming that's what that means.
And we understand that CE Squad housed the SDS until it moved to S Squad in 1995. So during the period that we're talking about, between your time in the Irish Research Unit and joining the SDS as a manager, CE Squad existed. Do you remember being part of CE Squad at that time, after the Irish Research Unit?
Only as a result, I think, of a document you might be showing me later, where it talks about me being referred, having had a document referred to me, and I'm thinking that I could only have been on CE, if that's what it was then. But I do not actually recall in any way the chronology of from C to CE and on to S for SDS.
Okay.
Absolutely not at all.
It appears that in at least 1993 to 1994, you were receiving intel from the SDS, particularly in relation to hunt sabbing and animal rights reports. So if I can take you to one of those reports, MPS 0730975, it's behind tab B44, sir. This is a report, 6th of February 1993, Surrey Union Foxhounds meet. And it appears from this note at the beginning that you are cited on it. DCI Edmondson to see. And if we scroll down onto the actual nature of the report, we can see that this has been sent by HN86, who is the DCI of the SDS at the time. This sort of report on the organisation, Hunt Saboteurs Association, would that be something that you would have been in receipt of around this time?
Well, if I was on C Squad at the time, and I don't remember it, but I can see from what I have in front of me that it looks as though I was copied in. Was I the DCI on CE Squad? If you can say chronologically, that's where I was, then fine.
Another report, B46, MPS 0739517.
Can I stop you again? I beg your pardon. But looking at that minute sheet, I see it says copy given to Arnie, and I believe that's my writing.
Okay.
If that helps in any way.
So would information come from the SDS into CE Squad and you'd post it onto Arnie.
From what I can remember, yes.
There's a number of these sorts of reports on this type of organisation, these sorts of demos during that period. Another one, for example, B48 MPS 0730987. You see again, it's been sent to you, this time by the chief super, well, it would have been HN67, who was the DI in the SDS at the time. And if we scroll down, we can see that, again, it's to do with the organisation HSA. And it's about a turnout, a demo outside.
Is there any way you
House.
can make this larger? 'Cause
Yes, of course.
I'm having difficulty.
Yeah, we can make it larger, possibly. The text on page 2, yes, please.
Thank you.
Do you recall receiving information about demonstrations and protests of about this size in relation to hunt saboteurs and animal rights activists?
As the DCI on the squad responsible for this, and I would have been in receipt of many such reports.
Can I ask you about MPS 0739425? Behind tab B54. We can see your name here again on the minute sheet. And the actual report itself, if we can expand the detail on that. We can see it's about a protest. It's a relatively small scale protest. Is that fair? I think the number was 25 people, if we can increase the numbers at the top of the page. Numbers present, 25. Isolated incident, 2 arrests. And it's the organisation here is the London Boots Action Group. Does that jog your memory as to the types of information you were receiving from the SDS at the time?
I see that it doesn't jog my memory that I actually remember the report, but it indicates the type of information that would have been received from SDS.
A further report on the London Boots Action Group is MPS 0745818 at page 2. This wasn't in the pack that was provided to you, but it's a further report of a meeting of the 11th of January 1994. And we can see in paragraph 2 talks about the reduction of boots pickets to that held in Camden each Sunday. So there's been a reduction in the type of activity in relation to boots. Paragraph 3 talks about potentially actions being taken outside the addresses of the homes of directors of Selfridges. And this is because they would have been selling fur coats, but that the addresses were probably out of date. and that the chairman of Selfridges, we can see at the bottom of that paragraph, no longer lived at the address. Do you see that? Do you recall any of this happening? Or
No,
being
I don't recall
referred
this.
to you?
No.
On page 1 of this document, we can see the minute sheet. And again, for DCI Edmondson to see. But the note after that reads that the security officer for the Sears Group, Selfridges, is aware of the threat, as is Boots PLC. I don't think that's your handwriting, is it?
Well, having looked at what I just showed you earlier, that there are two different types of handwriting, aren't there?
Yeah. Were you aware that this information was being relayed to the office for the Sears Group, Selfridges, and Boots PLC? Was that part of the dissemination of the intelligence at that time?
That certainly wouldn't be something that I would be aware of, that I would be sending. But I can see that there would have been some connection between the security people involved in Sears and the police service in some way. Other than that, I can't help you in that respect. But it seems to me clear that the police should have been involved in some way to help protect the people who may have been targeted. And if that's,
and similarly, Boots PLC as well. So we've got the security officer.
it says that, but forgive me, Sears or Boots, I don't know the difference.
Okay. And but your role in relation to that communication with those private companies, you're saying you weren't the person to send it off.
No,
you didn't communicate that, but you were aware of that being communicated. Is that right?
No, I'm not aware that it was communicated. I can see that there's a reason why the police service, now who else received that, I don't know, but I can see that the police service has a responsibility for the care of other people, including the managers or directors of certain companies. There must have been some mechanism set up outside of Special Branch, perhaps, in relation to this. The only other people that I am ever aware of who have some form of security responsibility would be the security service itself. But that's generally, from my recollection, we're talking of things like List X firms that the service would have been responsible for keeping overseeing. But also, I believe the service also provided some form of security advice to certain companies. But that's from the back of my mind. That's all I can help you in that respect.
You say List X firms. What firms were they?
That's why they're called List X. I don't know.
So you were aware that information from the SDS was being passed up to Special Branch, one of the desks, and being then passed on to those particular firms?
No, I'm not saying I was aware. I'm saying I could understand if that were the case. From sitting in my role as a DCI on CE squad, as it was, I don't recall there being that liaison while I was there with these groups. I don't know whose writing that is, or in what connection that was written.
And in terms,
I can understand it. That's what I'm saying to you.
I can see how you're saying there's a value that the police add to those companies in terms of their managing their own security and that sort of thing. In terms of List X, where would that be held or managed?
By the security service.
By the security service. So that went out to the security service.
If there was such a, forgive me, this is nothing to do with List X.
Okay.
Nothing at all.
No, but you're saying that's a similar sort of exercise.
The security service did does, I believe, probably still has that type of responsibility.
And this sort of information that was being picked up from the SDS, is that the sort of information that you on CE squad, or when you were a manager in SDS, would say, right, we understand the security service ought to know about this as well because of what they manage in terms of the List X companies? Would you send that to security service for that purpose?
I don't know that we sent it direct to the security service. We would have probably sent it to whichever squad was wanting to see it, and that the squad would then have sent it on. Interestingly enough, obviously I was on the squad that I've just referred to. I don't recall having sent that information to, that type of information to anybody outside of the police service.
In terms of information about trade unionists and trade union action, would that also go to the security service, or would that information come through the SDS to the squads and the information be sent then to either a private company or an organisation or a group that would have an interest in those union activities? Are you able to assist us with that?
I can only say that any information like that would have been copied to the security service if that's what they had sought, or would have just been kept by the squad receiving it to see whether it had any interest in relation to activity on the streets. Other than that, no.
What about the organisations or the even government departments that it might affect? I'm thinking kind of transport organisations or departments, or there's a trade union activity that is reported on under your management in relation to, I think it's Southwark Borough Council workers' dispute, an industrial dispute there in Southwark. What is Southwark Council? Would information come into the SDS through the undercover officers, go to a desk, and Southwark Borough Council, for instance, be told about the activities or the intentions of trade unionists?
Certainly not direct from SDS. It would have gone to whichever squad was responsible. And I know of no, even in my time elsewhere, I know of no connection like that to any organisation. I can see that the police might have had some, the police per se might have had some, but I certainly not from an SDS or special branch perspective.
So in terms of trade union activities, what if somebody was coming into the limelight, a particular trade unionist who was organising and leading an industrial dispute? Would details on that person obviously would be put on a file in special branch, I imagine, but what happens to that information? Would that information be disseminated out to the groups that were involved in that dispute? When I say groups, I mean the object of the activity.
I would say definitely not.
Why was that so different then? Because you've said that Sears Group for Debenhams, Boots PLC will get information so that they can manage their own security.
I didn't say I would have sent it. I said there may have been some mechanism within the police service to liaise with Sears Group.
Yeah.
In terms of a council, I think SDS concern was one thing only, and that was to provide intelligence about activity that might affect public order. Now, if a trade unionist was going to foment disorder on the streets, that would have been something that perhaps the branch dealing with public order would have wanted to know. But that's it.
Sticking with London Boots Action Group for a moment, so this is information that you were receiving still, as we understand, your position was in CE squad on the desk. B55, please. It's MPS 0746507. We can see that it's been copied to you at bullet point 2. The details of this report are quite personal in relation to an individual. So page 2, please. You can see that it's somebody that's involved in London Boots Action Group and other groups, and then on page 3, can we expand that top part? It details living arrangements, relationships, and a history of abuse. Do you see that?
I do.
What were your thoughts on receiving reports like this and the appropriateness of this sort of information being put into an SDS report?
I can only go back for my training when I first joined the branch, and the amount of we would have what they called comprehensive reports, I think it was, and officers would be expected to provide a comprehensive update on an individual, and anything affecting that individual in any way would have been put into a special branch report, and that's how we were trained. So this to me, if I received that, I'd say, yes, okay, that's a comprehensive overview of that particular person, and it would have just met what I would have thought would have been the way in which we dealt, the way in which we reported on comprehensive reporting.
Thank you. It can be taken down now, please. What was the purpose of that?
Well, I go back to what I've just said. This is how we were trained as special branch officers when we first joined. Comprehensive meant comprehensive, as much as we could identify and glean
But
about.
why? How would that information then be used?
You know, in that respect, I doubt very little of that would have been used. It would have just been part of this comprehensive branch system of reporting.
Did you ever query why such personal information was being reported on and held on file in relation to individuals?
No, I didn't.
So you didn't have a sense of why it was being reported, you just knew that it should be reported?
I knew that if this is from an undercover officer, I can't remember now, was it from an undercover officer?
Yes.
Yep. Then, again, the undercover officer just reports everything that they see and hear about particular individuals. That's part of how special branch reporting was conducted.
So did you have any training at all in terms of privacy, in terms of proportionality, as to what should be reported about people or activities?
Not when I joined in about 71, 72. No, there was no such training. I go back to what I said. Comprehensive report means a comprehensive understanding of an individual.
B56, please, MPS 0739633. This is a report from the 21st of May 1993. You can see that you're copied on the minute sheet, page 2, paragraph 2, please. These are personal documents belonging to EAB, the cipher that the inquiry has supplied. And on page 3, we can see the library card, driving licence. Page 4, please. This is an address book with names and phone numbers. And if we scroll through to page 8, we can see there's a lot of information in terms of name, phone number, names and phone numbers listed there. And it looks like research is then done in relation to each of these people that's listed in the back of the address book. You see it's annotated where the persons are known. And we can see about halfway down Andy Davey. Do you recognise that as being HN2 and Andrew Coles?
Oh, right, okay. I wouldn't have recognised that from that, but okay. I recognise the name now you've said it.
Page 9, please. This starts then to become a diary in terms of events. Page 10 is the handwritten note recording bank details. Page 11, please.
Sorry, a handwritten note regarding what?
Bank details.
Oh.
Jotted down bank details.
Okay.
Page 11 is the banking book. Why would all this information be copied to you? What would you be doing with this sort of information coming from the SDS?
Right, forgive me. Would you go back to the first minute sheet, because I note my names there and there's some annotations. And could you enlarge it, please?
Yeah. So we can see this is about a year before you join the SDS as manager. It's been sent by HN67, who was the DI in the SDS at that time, and all this information has been sent to different people.
I'll go back then. I will say this is normal special branch reporting. That's the first thing. And then I do note it says here, I've seen it. I looked as though I might have sent it on to someone else. I don't know. But to see and then arrange for research, that's what we would have done. All those names would have been researched against special branch records, I think, if that's what the research is meant to be referring to there, contained in the correspondence, and as if deemed appropriate. Well, it would only be appropriate if we could identify some of the names from our records.
And what about the lawfulness of an undercover officer obtaining these documents? Either, presumably, they'd have been into the home of somebody and looked through their personal belongings, or being into the bag of somebody and taken out these personal documents and copied them. What was the lawful basis for doing things like that?
I cannot answer that question. I do not know what the lawful basis was.
Did you ever turn your mind to what the lawful basis might be?
Certainly not at the time.
It was never a part of a discussion amongst people in Special Branch?
At the time, no. I can't say that it was.
And certainly not a part of training?
No.
In terms of policy documents copied to you before you joined the SDS as manager, can I have up, please, tab B45 MPS 0730597? We can see this is a a note an interim report about changes to performance measures, management arrangements and potential for development arising from a meeting with DAC Howley the week before. So this is a report from the 19th of January 1993. If we shrink that back down, please, we can see that this note was sent by DAC Security John Howley to ACSO William Taylor. It was William Taylor at the time. And scrolling on to page 2, we can see this is an SDS report. It's authored by HN86, dated the 15th of January 1993. And the contents are performance indicators, training, policy guidelines regarding participation in crime. Bullet point 4 is redacted out, and SDS deployment beyond the Metropolitan Police District. Does this show that the top brass within the Met were discussing all these key elements of the SDS? The SDS wasn't a unit that just operated in secret by itself. The chain of command were very much involved in these 5 areas of SDS business.
I would say yes.
And was that, you understood that to be right, did you, when you were a manager of the SDS, that people like the DAC Howley were very much involved in the setup of the SDS?
And Mr. Hurley was very much involved in that respect. I did have access direct to him should I need to.
What about ACSO? Were they a little bit further removed, or were they?
With all due respect, I knew of Mr. whatever his name is, but I didn't have that connection. Okay. In relation to that. I had other connections, okay, but not that.
Training on page 11, please. You see here, this is all about the ACSO believe there may be scope for training inputs to incoming field officers from SO10. Now, this training that was delivered to SO10, was that the undercover crime department within Special Branch?
Yes.
We can see at paragraph 2.2, it says the strength of the SDS is variable according to targeting priorities, and a considerable time is spent in the grooming of potential field officers who have to pass a stringent selection procedure presided over by Commander of Operations. At that time, Commander of Operations was Donald Buchanan. Do you remember Mr. Buchanan?
I remember Mr. Buchanan. I don't know if I do. What date is this? Sorry.
This is a 1993 document, but it remained to be Donald Buchanan during the time that you were manager of the SDS right. as well.
Okay, thank you.
Do you remember Commander Buchanan having involvement in potential field officers being recruited to the SDS? He
or other commanders would have had probably the final approval, yes. Because I think I have seen other documents which indicate that from the bottom up we would have pulled together a number of potential recruits. We've done some work around that. We'd have pulled together a case for a particular officer to go through the selection process, which was not a true, not going in front of a board, but going through a type of selection process. And I believe there was a final then presentation to the commander to indicate what we had found and the potential for a particular recruit.
It's described here as the grooming of potential field officers. Was this essentially a tap on the shoulder, you'll be the sort of person we'd like in the SDS, and then they went through a bit of an assessment process?
It's a very blunt way of putting it, but in respect, SDS would always have been on the lookout for potential recruits, and we had what at the time I thought was a very good mentoring system, and a system of referring back to former SDS officers who perhaps would have just quietly in the background been looking to see whether certain officers had potential.
And was that quite a small pool of officers that...
Forgive me, I can't remember.
It was only officers within Special Branch, is that fair?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Sorry, yep.
And what sort of attributes would make somebody stand out as a potential SDS officer?
It is odd, actually, thinking back now, because there was a variety of individuals that came, each with an almost unique personality. But there would have been something in their personality that would have perhaps identified them as being possibly of value to SDS. But they would have had to have shown their integrity, loyalty to the branch, loyalty to the police service.
Was loyalty the predominant factor that would attract somebody to the SDS, or attract the SDS to a potential recruit? It was their sense of loyalty. Loyalty
and integrity as well, and how they performed on their general duties.
Paragraph 2.3 on this page looks at the type of training or tuition that would be provided for people. That sort of setup, would that be the same as it was in your day as well? You continued that process under your management?
I would agree with that.
Page 12, please. Paragraph 2.4. I'll give you a moment to read that. Do you see that the emphasis is placed on self-development? Was there quite a lot of responsibility placed on the new recruits to develop their own undercover identity, and they had responsibility for their own deployment? There wasn't a lot of interference or oversight once they were deployed. Is that right?
No, I disagree with that. I think looking and just reading this, certainly self-development means that they have to provide and satisfied with the legend that they're living. That would have been supported by the DI in charge of the unit at the time. In my case, it would have been Bob Lambert, thoroughly experienced officer who would have understood all the ramifications of developing a good and secure legend. And as it says here, I'm sure we followed this through with a mentor, a former field officer was involved in talking to them. It was always to do with supporting them and how they developed their legend, which they had to live. So they had to be really confident in what they were producing, that it would provide them with the security they needed. But there were all these other officers around them, I believed, giving support.
In terms of the training, it was largely, would you say, by osmosis from the field officers onto the new recruits?
Yes, there is no, I don't know what I say is, there was no formal training as one would now think, perhaps.
If we look at paragraph 2.5, there was some consideration back then in 1993 of SO10 training being used. And if we can expand the next part of the page. So there was contact between Special Branch, SO12, with SO10 crime, undercover operations, to see if there could be some cross-fertilisation of training. But it was found that the SO10 training was too different from what the needs of the SO12 Special Branch was. Is that fair to say? Do you recall anything about that?
Careful what I'm saying here. May I just refer to...
Yes, of course.
Yeah. HN 86, from what I recall, he was the one who instigated the contact with SO10, and my discussions with him at the time, subsequently, were that while we had every respect for what SO10 was doing and the way that it operated, the two systems were quite different. And therefore, we had to be careful that we shouldn't do everything that SO10 seemingly did. And that's what 86 was telling me. And I read from this, and I do accept it was different. I also visited, subsequently, I believe, SO10 to discuss with them such things, and came away with the same view.
So as a result, was the training within the SDS kept fairly internal, and each officer learnt from the previous officers?
Generally.
And could you see any danger in that there wasn't any new ideas coming into the office, and any bad behaviours would simply be passed on from one officer to another officer without being checked?
I don't know about, you might say bad practice, but I don't know. I think there were enough officers who, even on the field or in the field, who would have understood what the recruit was being told, and would have said, no, that's not the best way to deal with it.
Can I have a look at page 14, please, in relation to participation in crime? Paragraph 3.1. Again, the ACSO, having oversight of this, says that there should be more in the way of written policy and practice notes, especially in respect of participation in criminal activity. And the action, further down, please, was to develop some guidelines. I want to come on to those because they're set out at page 18 of this document, which we'll finish just before the break.
Okay.
Page 16, please. It says at paragraph 3.8 that arrests up until these days have been relatively few, but the risks of arrest will be increasing given the groups that are being infiltrated. Did you accept that when you came in as a manager, these groups that were being infiltrated, anti-fascist action or activity, anarchism and animal rights, were a real risk of arrest and participation in crime? Is that what your understanding was?
I certainly began to understand that there was more of an opportunity for them to be involved, and that involvement might take them into the criminal area.
And page 17, please, paragraph 3.10.
Sorry, could I just
Sorry.
Just for a moment, talk them into the criminal area, but always in the back of our minds was that they were not there per se to provide the type of intelligence that an SO10 officer would do, i.e. standing in court and giving evidence. Ours was much a longer term basis. It would have taken an officer a long time to get that close, and I think it would have been, we'd have lost the value of that officer if purely because he or she had to stand in the witness box. She would have.
So it was more intelligence based rather than evidential gathering.
And intelligence then can be used by other areas of the police to develop the criminal evidence. Much as I learned, and going back to my B Squad days, much as I learned about how the RUC used to work. They had their own intelligence side, but then moved it over to the crime side to develop the arrests.
I just want to finish on this document before we go to a break. So paragraph 3.10 on page 17, please. It says that here that no fully committed SDS officer has ever given evidence in court proceedings. And was that your sense that when you took over management of the SDS, nobody had actually given evidence in court proceedings before, or did you have a different understanding?
No, I see that written, and I don't think I can differ on that.
We'll come to people being arrested under your watch and giving evidence in court, but did you have a sense then when you were managing those events that this was something new, you were entering new territory?
You know, thinking back, I just think I would probably think it was a difficult territory. I don't know about new territory.
Looking at those guidelines very briefly, page 18, please. These are the written SDS guidelines on participation in crime. Is that something that you and your officers would have been very familiar with in the SDS?
Could you enlarge it for me again, please?
Yes, of course. Yeah.
Thank you.
We don't necessarily have to read the whole of it just at the moment. It addresses things like agent provocateur.
Yeah, I was just going to say that one thing that was certainly picked up by me almost just prior to joining, and when I first sat in the DCI's chair, that one small sentence is quite significant. No SDS officer will counsel, incite or procure the commission of a crime.
And that was something that was hammered home to the officers in the SDS?
I would say yes.
What about on page 19, little e, so paragraph E? At no time will an SDS officer commit himself or herself to a course to mislead a court, and this could include appearing on behalf of a defendant as a witness. Was that something that was readily understood by you and the UCAs in the SDS?
I don't know about readily understood, actually.
Did you train your officers in relation to that or advise them in relation to that?
You know, I do not recall specifically raising that with them, but I'm sure that at some stage that would have been a discussion.
Did you take steps to ensure the officers had this document and read it and abided by it?
Well, that document or similar document in particular in relation to agent provocateur, or which contained that, was definitely there and available to anybody.
When you say
all officers.
When you say available, what steps did you take, if any, to make sure that they read it, they understood it, and they complied with it?
They would, when they were in the back office, they would have had to have read it, and that would have been, I'm sure, would have been a discussion. I don't recall those discussions, but would have been a discussion by them, with them, either by In my case, it would have been Bob Lambert, and indeed anybody within the office who, because it was a team effort in relation to this. Yes, okay, I was the DCI, but we had a very good team of officers I say management, but in the back office role.
Thank you. So I note the time. I've run over slightly from 11:30, but now is perhaps a good time to break.
Certainly. We'll break for 15 minutes.
All rise. Please could we have up on screen MPS 0737236 behind tab B67. This is a November 1993 SDS memorandum in relation to SDS or ARNI rules of engagement. So again, this is a few months before you became a manager of the SDS. And if we can go first paragraph, please, to enlarge it. It's effectively an attempt to protect undercover sources and not disclose intelligence in criminal cases by recording information differently, and that's following a recent Crown Court ruling. Do you recall where a Crown Court ruling meant that information had to be disclosed to the defendants, and this is an attempt by the SDS to try and prevent intelligence being disclosed during criminal proceedings? Do you recall anything about that?
No, I don't.
Do you recall any change in how information was disclosed during criminal cases?
No, I don't.
Okay. Page 2, paragraph 7. We can see that the note was actually written by HN86, who was the DCI of the SDS at the time. And it says that you have been consulted. In what capacity would you have been consulted in relation to this change in approach to recording of intelligence? And I appreciate that we haven't been through this paragraph by paragraph, but essentially what is set out in this document is that the names of sources of intelligence would be kept very separately to the intelligence, and the names of those that are being spied on would also be redacted or separated out in some way, so that information on the defendants wouldn't have to be disclosed. Can you tell us why you would be consulted in relation to that, and what you might have said in relation to that?
Okay, firstly, I have no recollection whatsoever of this report, or the report. If I was consulted, which obviously I must have been, it probably was because I was a DCI on CE squad. But I just don't remember this whatsoever.
What was your understanding of how intelligence was recorded? You've already mentioned the difference between an intelligence gathering exercise, which the SDS was primarily concerned with, and that being different from an evidential gathering exercise, which SO10 was more concerned with. Can you help us with how information was stored and how that might be disclosed in criminal proceedings from when you were a manager?
I'm afraid I can't.
Okay.
No, I'm sorry.
You say in your witness statement at paragraph 117 that even before joining the SDS, you always understood it to be about prevention of serious public disorder. And you qualify that in subparagraph A in relation to the prevention or control in conjunction with other parts of the MPS. I can bring that up on screen for you.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay.
MPS 0749544. It's behind tab A1. Page 74. Paragraph 117. What did you mean by serious public disorder? And by that, I mean, was there, in terms of numbers, level of disruption? Does 35 people outside Grosvenor House Hotel vociferously protesting the Horse and Hounds ball qualify for that sort of thing? The type of information you were getting reports on in terms of the animal rights activity, would that constitute, in your mind, serious public disorder?
Unfortunately, it probably would have been in my mind that could have been serious. It's all grades of disorder, but I can see how such a gathering could eventually become serious.
And in terms of the level of disruption, would events like that, you say that would create a significant level of disruption that required reporting?
Sorry, where are you? Could I just see what you're looking at? Or?
In terms of the animal rights reports that
Yeah.
you had been receiving during your time in CE Squad prior to becoming a manager in the SDS, that was your understanding of serious public disorder, was it? That did constitute serious public disorder in your view?
As I said, a gathering of 35 could end up being serious depending on the outcome and their intention. Right up to a full-scale riot, not with them, but as we have seen. I'm sorry, I'm trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
I don't quite see what you were trying to get from me.
In terms of what's set out here in your witness statement, paragraph 117, the prevention and detection of crime, subparagraph B. In terms of the prevention of crime, was disruption of political groups a part of the objective of the SDS in terms of infiltrating a group and trying to disrupt it, to prevent it from being able to act in protest?
I don't know that SDS per se would have been able to disrupt a particular crime, but the evidence, the intelligence that was being provided by an SDS officer could have been used by other parts of the police service to disrupt activity.
Was there any sense that once a UCO infiltrated a group, that was almost the death knell for a group, in that they would try and disrupt the personal relationships amongst those within the group?
No, I don't recognise that.
You became an SDS manager, you were the DCI, from the 4th April 1994 to July 1997, so just over 3 years, that's right, isn't it?
Yes.
You say you can't recall how or why you were selected to be the DCI. Was there a relationship between you and Superintendent Robert Potter? You've set out in your witness statement that you were a close family friend of his, and at the time he was the Chief Superintendent above the SDS. Was he involved in your recruitment at all?
But let me just touch on this. I would like to think I was recruited because I had wide experience in very sensitive areas of SB as a manager, very sensitive areas of SB. And I would like to think that my career and what had been seen about my career had given senior officers the opportunity of deciding that I would fit what they wanted as an SDS manager. That's the first thing. As regards to being Mr. Potter, I do not recall him being involved in the recruitment. I don't recall it. But I will say here quite openly, Bob Potter was a very good and close family friend of mine. but I still do not think that has anything whatsoever to do with my recruitment onto SDS.
Would he have helped advise you as to whether to take the position, or given you some advice about the SDS and what it involved, given you information about it? Would you have discussed the position with him and what the SDS was all about?
I don't recall doing that.
When you say senior officers would have been involved in your recruitment, are we talking about Commander Ops Mr. Buchanan, or DAC for Security John Howley? Would he have been in charge
Again, I
of that?
can't answer that question in terms. When I said officers would have been responsible for recruiting, there was something euphemistically called horse trading, which I know that the inquirers heard about. But in fact, it was at a time when, at any time within the branch, when an officer was to be moved to another unit, there would have been senior officers from the squads, I imagine, together with the various commanders, because I believe there was more than one, and indeed Mr. Howley possibly would have had some say.
We've heard evidence from HN88 that there are two ways to succeed in Special Branch, and that was through rugby or Freemasonry. Do you accept that?
Who is this fellow?
HN88. Maybe on your cipher list.
Well, right, I'm going to say that's not who I've seen a statement by somebody else who made that, who has said that.
Okay.
And that was not, as far as I know, it was not 88. It was somebody else, but I don't know if you want me to say who I think it was. No?
It's
Okay.
really just the sentiment and whether you agree with that. Is that something that you recognise?
No, I most certainly do not. No, I don't agree with that.
Were you a rugby player and had connections through rugby?
I was a rugby player.
But did that not have any influence over your recruitment to the SDS?
To SDS, I would say absolutely none. No. It
It
might have helped in the branch, but not in SDS.
How well did you know DCI HN86 before you took over? He was the DCI before you.
Oh, sorry, yep. Our paths had crossed. I knew of him.
And Bob Lambert?
Again, our paths would have crossed and I knew of him.
But you
I don't remember working with him. I don't quite remember working with 86, although, forgive me, I might have done.
You became quite close with Bob Lambert, though, once you joined the SDS. He was already the DI there when you joined as DCI. Is that right?
I would like to think that I did come close to Bob, as I hope I came close to all my colleagues within the... Now, I know they don't refer to themselves as managers, but the officers, I'll refer to them as the back office for the moment, or the office. I hope that I came very close with all of them in a professional way.
At paragraph 27 of your witness statement, you say that you brought management skills to the SDS and Bob Lambert was respected by the UCO, so having him as my deputy was advantageous. How did you divide labour between you and Bob Lambert? Was there such a division?
Well, firstly, I was, what the word would be, but I was, it isn't the word gifted, but I was lucky enough to have officers of huge experience within the back office. That's the first thing I'd like to say. I held them in high regard. I knew of them, and having worked with them, I knew the type of people they were. So they were an excellent group of, I think, DCI, DI, and 2 DSs at the time. You've mentioned John Webb, an amazing man, really, very intellectual, very clever, very experienced, and somebody I held in high regard. Can I mention the other one?
Yes, I think so, yeah. Yes, you can.
Okay, Bob McIntosh,
Yeah.
I mean, hugely respected. I'd worked with him in the Irish Research Unit as well. Enormous amount of time for him as well. And Bob Lambert, my goodness, his experience as an SDS officer was invaluable to me. He was somebody that I could turn to for in relation to how operations should be conducted, how officers should be supported. I really did feel that Bob was very good. Now, you asked me about the division of labour. I will just put it this way. I was the boss of this small team, but I had a great team around me. And eventually, we came to the decisions together, but I would have, as a DCI, I therefore would have made the additional, the final decision.
When you say Bob's experience was of great advantage to you, in your witness statement you say that you didn't actually know much about his experience at all as a UCO in the SDS. You didn't know about the groups he infiltrated, you didn't know about his relationships with people, you didn't know that he had fathered a child. If you didn't know about the ins and outs of his deployment, how was that supposed to be of use to you?
But I knew that Bob had been an undercover officer. I knew that I was told that he'd been extremely successful. He was held in high regard because of the work that he'd conducted on SDS. I felt that was somebody I could turn to. That's how I was putting it to you.
Is it right that although he's held in high regard and people respected him for what he had done as a UCO, he actually didn't provide much information about his experiences and didn't use his own experiences in terms of training up others? He wasn't open about his activities in his undercover deployment. Is that right to say?
That's not how I recall this relationship and how I recall him working. I've always assumed that Bob gave of his experience when talking to newer people joining the unit. And I think in relation to the weekly meetings, Bob would have been able to provide some support or understanding to each of the officers that he spoke to, if not necessarily in my presence.
Is it your evidence, though, that he didn't disclose the fact that he was in a sexual relationship with Helen Dine? In a sexual relationship with Jackie?
The first I ever heard that Bob had been involved in any form of activity like that was probably long after I left the police service, and something this is dragging it into my mind, but something that either appeared on television or in the media, because I think he was photographed leaving a meeting where he'd been confronted by some activists and accused of wrongdoing. And I think they followed him down the street. That's the very first I ever heard of that.
You say that Bob brought the operational experience and understanding to the office, and you brought management skills, people management. Was Bob Lambert very much more involved with the UCOs and he managed them, and you were more of an administrator manager in the background?
That's not how I thought this was working, but thinking about it now, it could well be that he had more of the hands-on operational day-to-day activity. I think you are aware of this, Bob and I shared an office. So we would discuss any issues that arose. We talked, I've mentioned it before, we talked on a daily basis about officers and how they were progressing, what support they needed.
Did you get the sense that he set the tone with the undercover officers? Did his influence have much more of an impact in that, and consequently his role, was that unduly inflated because of his previous role as the UCO?
That's not how I saw it at the time. I will say that. I've heard a number of officers, and I think I've seen some writing that people held him in such high regard. So it could well be that subconsciously that was happening. But that's not how I was working, what I was working to.
Did you feel that you weren't really in a position to discipline UCOs because you hadn't got that previous UCO experience yourself?
No, that certainly is not the case. If somebody had needed disciplining, I would have taken that responsibility, as I did in other aspects of my police career, in my own way of doing things.
In terms of who was actually managing the officers, we've heard DS Webb say that he didn't really consider himself as being a manager, but he was more of an intelligence processor. Who was it that really had to manage and oversee the officers during the course of their deployment?
I'm going to go back to what I've said. Certainly the DCI and the DI were the top two in terms of what you're referring to, but I always thought of, and you're right, and John is right, his role was predominantly as the intelligence manager, but it was a team effort. That's how I viewed it, a team effort, with everybody bringing something different perhaps to the table for discussion. So yes, there may have been somebody with a bit more of a responsibility for one area or in another, but I just get this. I go back to how I felt at the time. This was a team effort with regard to managing, and I say managing, the staff who were the undercover officers. We didn't see them day in and day out. We didn't see them operating. We didn't visit. I've even been asked by somebody at some stage, did you go and inspect the officers' premises to know that they existed? I mean, some of those ideas are ludicrous. We're talking about officers who were trusted, who had built their legends, who had gone out and were then operating in the fields that they had been asked to infiltrate.
When you say it's ludicrous to have a sense of, where they're operating, the location, the premises they're living in, what was your sense of your duty to ensure that your officers were turning up for work as required and carrying out the job in the manner that they ought to? What level of oversight was there?
When I referred to somebody, because it was at some stage throughout this long process, somebody has said to me, shouldn't you've gone, shouldn't managers have gone just to check on the premises? As police officers years ago, if we wanted to go and live somewhere, a senior officer or a sergeant or somebody would have gone to the actual address, checked it over to see that it was suitable for a police officer to live in. And I think that's what somebody was actually saying to me. Did you go and check the premises? I thought, well, I could go and look and see if it was a squat or something like a squat or a studio flat. That's what I was referring to him in relation to checking on premises. We knew everywhere that they lived. We we thought we did. We would have had records of where they lived. We would have we might even at some stage have gone around the area to understand what the area was they were living in. We might even have driven past where they were living. We might have done. I don't recall doing that. But do you see what I'm trying to say? We had a full understanding of what each officer was doing or trying to do. But we weren't there we weren't there as uniformed officers saying, knock on the door, does so-and-so live here? We're just checking on him.
No, of course not. There would have been different ways to check, wouldn't there, to monitor the UCOs in the field. And would one of those options have been to look at the police national computer, for instance, to see who was living in a premises if they were going to move in there as their cover accommodation?
I think that was done.
That was done.
My understanding is on building the legend, and we go back to what we talked about before, on building the legend, the legend was built by them largely because they had to live it, but there were other people supporting them who perhaps would have done exactly what you're saying. They would have perhaps done collator checks, collators being the local recorders of incidents. So we would have known that Street A was liable to be broken into too often, or Street B was an area that suffered from criminal damage. Yes, we would have done things like that.
And you would know who was living above or below, for instance, if somebody was going to take a first floor flat? Would you have done checks on that?
I think, I don't recall that being done, but I can't imagine why it would not have been done if it were possible. Yep.
And in terms of that being done when an officer first deployed, would that have been done during the course of their deployment over the next few years if there was a change in their circumstances? You don't. What I'm suggesting is, would that wouldn't have just been done once when they did their legend and then off they go for the next 4 or 5 years or so, and no further monitoring or checks being done on them?
I would like to think that we did support them in that way if they moved somewhere. I cannot tell you that I picked up the phone and did that type of inquiry, but I would like to think that we did give that support in that respect.
You say you wouldn't have done that inquiry. Who would have done that inquiry?
One of the officers, like John perhaps, or Bob, or the new officer in the back office, or indeed after a while I believe we had some civilian colleagues who would have been asked to do some checks. I think what I'm trying to offer you is that we would have done our utmost to ensure that where they were wanting to live would have not caused them any operational difficulties.
And part of that, you would have known who was living there if they were to be living with anybody else?
One would hope so, yes.
In terms of training for you as a manager, did you receive a handover from HN86?
I did.
Did he tell you about the tradecraft manual?
Yeah, yes. Yeah.
And was that something that you read?
Yes, I think we've referred to it as well. It's, I think, what sticks in my mind is agent provocateur.
Okay.
That's the one thing that really does stick in my mind.
So there was a whole binder full of information that was available to officers that were coming in as new recruits to be able to train themselves up effectively on what to expect and how to behave. Is that right? Is that fair?
It was certainly, I can visualise this. It wasn't very neat, but I can visualise this binder that officers were offered or told they should read and as part of their induction. And I looked upon it as part of, forgive me here, not many people understand what I mean, but general orders that police officers, there's a thick binder, and we all had to study it verbatim almost for our exams. But one of the things about general orders was that somebody said it's a book full of mistakes that we've learned from. And I think in some respects, the Tradecraft Manual was a build-up of knowledge over the years of officers who had completed their tours of duty.
So
not everybody
almost,
would have done that, but that's how I recall the Tradecraft Manual.
so a lessons learned sort of approach.
Yes.
And did you find that useful for you when you first joined the SDS to read and to gen up on the sorts of experiences that your officers would be confronted with in the field?
I'm going to say I must have found it useful, but you know, I just don't remember it. I don't remember reading it. I must have done. There's no doubting that.
What was your view of the adequacy of that as a training material for your officers? Did you feel like you needed to supplement it with something more orderly and legally based?
No, I won't say that was the case. Training was, I think you've mentioned it, on-the-job osmosis. It was a matter of the processes that we had in place to do with mentoring, speaking to former officers to learn from their experiences. That was the, for want of a better term, training. There was no formal training, no classroom work that could be done or was done. I believe SO10 did have something similar. I can't remember.
But I think that was the training that we looked at, that it was decided that wouldn't apply to SO12, SDS,
SO10,
because it was very different
yes.
deployment.
Yeah.
So there wasn't that formal structure
No,
in
there
place in terms
definitely
of
wasn't.
training. And I think in your witness statement you say, you know, the officers, while they're in the back office, would get a chance to speak to other officers, field officers, and once they've deployed, they might come across a situation and they would ask other field officers, they might ask a manager, and ultimately they will make up their own mind as to what to do about it. Is that a fair assessment?
It's a relatively fair assessment. I go back to what I said. There was the mentor system that 86 had introduced, I believe. It may have been introduced before, but there was a mentoring system. There was I referred to it once before, not here but elsewhere, as the family of SDS. So there were a group of officers who had that background, who could talk to officers about their experiences. Because I should imagine many experiences were different. They might have been joining the same organisation, but you couldn't account for everything.
Different contexts. Different contexts would arise.
Yeah, thank you for that. Yeah.
In some cases, though, there would be a correct answer, wouldn't there? For instance, non-reporting of legally privileged material. There is a right and wrong answer to some of these scenarios, isn't there?
I can see that there is now.
Was that not recognised at the time?
I don't know. Forgive me. It is a long time ago, and I don't recall that specifically.
You've mentioned agent provocateur. Don't be an agent provocateur. That was something that there's a right and a wrong answer, isn't there?
Yes,
And for your officers, they were told about that, and
yes,
that was.
As I said much earlier, that's that one sentence. It's there, and that document which AXO had seen.
In terms of the range of other boundaries that there should be on such an invasive policing method, none of those other boundaries were put in place. None of those other boundaries were reinforced and emphasised to your officers, though.
No, not in their intelligence gathering role, no.
The no sex in relation to targets and members of the public in their undercover identities. That wasn't emphasised, was it, to the officers?
No, it wasn't, but forgive me here, you're right. It would be wrong of me to say that we ever said don't have sex, but we would never have endorsed it. I think that's the difference. And I've heard people say, I believe, that they were told it was okay. That was certainly, I know of no officer that was told having sex was permitted, and certainly the people I worked with in the office, as far as including Bob, would ever have said it's okay to have sex. I think that's quite important.
In terms of that explicit no to sex, there's lots of other ways in which it can be impliedly looked over, blind eye turned. Was that the actual practice, so that it was a don't ask, don't tell policy that was in place?
Let me say quite emphatically, that is not the case. No blind eye was turned by me had I learned that somebody was having sex.
So that requires the premise that somebody came to you and explicitly told you that they were having sex undercover.
Say that again. Sorry.
That's based on the premise, is it, that somebody would have to come to you and explicitly tell you that they were having sex in their undercover identity?
Okay, to me, but I go back to what I'd said in terms of the office and the daily contact. I would have hoped that had any of the officers, I say below me, but any officers part of the team had started to believe that there was some sexual relationship, I would like to think that I had been told. And I can tell you now, I never learned of any sexual activity by any of my undercover officer colleagues until after I'd left the police service, and indeed it came out in some of the ways that it has.
Why was that prohibition on sex not put in writing? Why was there no policy in relation to that?
I can't answer that, and I will say, in a way, I'm sorry that perhaps that wasn't in writing, but I'm also going to say this as well. We can say to people, you cannot do something, but if they found themselves in a position, even with the chemistry between two people, if they then found that that chemistry was too strong and that they wanted to get a closer sexual relationship, being told that they can't have it would not have stopped them. But it would have made it very clear, wouldn't it, that that was wrong behaviour, it shouldn't happen, and that they would be disciplined for that. I do agree with that. And that wasn't in place, was it, at the time? No, it wasn't. And that's a significant omission on the part of management. Would you agree with that? I do agree with that, yes. So I do agree utterly with what you're saying there, but I go back to what I said earlier today. We put our officers in such strange positions that many had not, many in the police service would not have encountered. We were asking an enormous amount of them to almost live double lives. And you're right. In strict theory, management terms, yes, write a document and say you will not have sex, and you can be disciplined if you do. We could, we didn't, but I'm just saying, I don't know that would have stopped everybody having had that close relationship. Recognising that difficult situation that you put your officers in is all the more reason, isn't it, to have very clear guidance, very clear support available to the officers to help them avoid these situations, to ensure that they don't behave in that way. There are two things there. Yes, we should always have been giving support, but I don't know what we could say, even now, to an officer to stop them doing something like that. And once we'd found out, if we had found out, I think now, this is hindsight. May I say, this is now me thinking, oh, okay, I've read this, I understood this was happening. Now, what would I have done? If somebody had come to me and said, oh, I found myself having a sexual relationship with somebody, and we'd had that discipline side of things, yes, they would have had to, because of the discipline rule, they would have had to have been taken off the field, out of the field. But it would not have happened that day. We still had to make certain that although they'd had that relationship, that for two reasons. One, importantly, with the relationship that they'd entered into, was it fleeting? Because sometimes there are these fleeting relationships. Was it deeper? So we'd have had a responsibility then, and I'm learning this now because of what we've discovered, but I'm thinking, what could I have done? So fleeting, okay, that's you've got to be moved. If it's developed into quite a strong relationship, we're not going to be able to move them straight away. It's like any of the exfiltration that we tried. People just did not turn up on one day and then leave SPS field. It took sometimes a number of months to leave. And we'd have had to give that as well. So you're right, we could have had that rule, and yes, they would have been brought off, but they would still have had to be brought off carefully, both for the relationship they'd developed and for the sake of the integrity of the unit.
Your responsibility to the officer and to the members of the public didn't arise once a sexual relationship had been entered into. Your responsibility arose before that officer was deployed, didn't it? You had a responsibility before sending that officer into their groups to protect members of the public from any misconduct. And you've suggested, well, there's not much we could do. Doesn't that indicate a lack of imagination in terms of what could be done to prevent sexual relationships occurring? And to assist, I'm thinking one of the most basic things could have been to build something into their legends, to say, oh, they're not interested in a sexual relationship. Very, very basic steps could have been taken, couldn't they?
That was discussed in some cases, that I do know. There were people were. I'm sure I could read something somewhere where somebody had been told, just say you're not interested in sex, or you mentioned it yourself. I've had a bad experience of got a sexual disease or something. Yes, there could be ways, but.
And emphasising to not only the officer but their families just how important it was that this was a risk, to make them aware of it so that they could prepare themselves for it.
Yeah, I can see what you're saying.
Are you saying that wouldn't help at all?
I don't believe that I ever, in talking to any of my colleagues' wives, I ever discussed extramarital relationships. No.
You didn't, but should that have been the case? Could that have happened as another form of protection against this behaviour?
It could have been raised. That's all I can say. It could have been raised.
Do you accept that there's a number of different steps and measures that could have been put into place to prevent sexual relationships occurring undercover?
And I'm trying to think of what you've been saying about sort of start at the grassroots and saying, no sex undercover, and all the way through. I mean, yes, in hindsight, I probably would have acted differently. But I still don't quite know how I would have done it, if I'm honest.
In your tenure, there were 9 open officers that we're aware of, 8 of whom had sexual relationships or alleged sexual relationships undercover. We had Andy Cole's an alleged relationship with Jessica, alleged harassment of Claire Hildreth, and others say that he was quite lecherous. Trevor Morris, HN78, had a relationship with women we're calling B and Jenny. HN1, known as Matt Rayner, had an alleged relationship with Liz Fuller. HN43, Peter Francis, had, he says, various one-night stands. HN26, Christine Green, had a relationship with Thomas Frampton. HN15, Mark Jenner, had a relationship with a woman we're calling Alison for 5 years. Jim Boyling, HN14, had a relationship with Monica for about 6 months and went on to have relationships thereafter with Ruth for about 18 months and then Rosa for a significant period and had 2 children. HN16, James Straven, he had a friendship with Wendy during your tenure and went on to have relationships with Sarah and Ellie that continued for a significant period post his deployment. HN81, we're not aware of him having a sexual relationship undercover, but that is a significant amount, would you agree, of sexual relationships undercover that you must have known about?
I think some of those that you've recounted, they might have been with me as a DCI, but I believe 1 or 2, their activities started after I left. But I'm going to go and say this quite emphatically. I was never given any indication from anywhere that one of the officers was having a sexual relationship.
Have you listened to or read the accounts of the women who have given their evidence to this inquiry?
I've listened to 1 or 2, and I might have read 1, that's all.
And have you listened to or read the accounts of your officers that have given evidence to this inquiry and about the sexual relationships that they've had, that they were engaging in under your management? Are you aware of their evidence?
Not all of them, and I can't remember which ones.
The sense that officers deploying into their target groups would be inundated with sexual offers and trying to bat off sexual advances is not something that has come across in the accounts that we've heard of from the women who have been involved in relationships with these officers. That's not how these relationships have evolved. It has, according to them and according to some of the officers, it's either evolved mutually or, in many respects, it's been because of the officers pursuing sexual relationships with them. The officers have been, in some respects, quite predatory in their approaches to women. Do you recognise that that was a real risk of you putting officers out into groups, often involving young activists? Some of these women have been very vulnerable and very young. For instance, Jessica was only 19 when she met Andy Cole. She thought he was 24. He was actually 32. And she'd just moved out of home and had moved to London and joined a group of other animal rights supporters. These are sometimes vulnerable women, all of whom were very naive to the invasive practice of the SDS undercover operations. None of them knew that they had to protect themselves from officers such as your officers that were being deployed into their groups. Do you accept that these are women who have been subject to something that they never knew existed and could not protect themselves from?
I do take issue with the terminology of invasive activity by undercover officers. I don't recognise that. And on each account, I can only now go back in hindsight, having read or seen some of it, and reiterate to you, I had no information, no knowledge whatsoever that officers were undertaking any activity in sexual activity with other people. None. And I go back to how, if it was known, then I wasn't told. And I go back to how I thought our system was working, through the mentor system, through the office system, through the weekly meetings. No one ever, in my presence, referred to having had sexual relationships. No one whatsoever.
Given some of the evidence that we've heard about the officers taking steps themselves to pursue a sexual relationship, had they been told that that was prohibited, is there a good chance that they would not have taken those steps, thereby preventing the relationships from happening?
Forgive me, I can't answer that question in the positive. I just cannot. I could have told them that they must not have sexual relations. I did not tell them. But even telling them, I don't know that we've had this discussion, I don't know that would have stopped people had they really wanted to pursue, or indeed had suddenly found that being so close to somebody that their relationship evolved into a very caring one, for all I know.
You say that you don't recognise the word invasive in terms of the deployment.
I think you were suggesting that every SDS officer was a sexual predator. That's what I think you were. That's how I interpreted what you've just said to me.
No, some of the officers, from the evidence that we've heard, some of your officers were quite predatory, according to the accounts that we've heard, in their pursuit of sexual relationships with some of the women. Do you accept that?
I knew nothing about it. If you were telling me that that's what happened from the perspective of the women concerned and the officers who have admitted it, then I accept what you're saying. But that's not how they were put in, how or why they were put into any field.
But the whole nature of undercover policing and infiltrating target groups, that's an invasive policing tactic, isn't it?
In that respect, yes.
And in terms of the relationships that some of the officers had, it was way beyond any policing tactic that one could have imagined before hearing about the events of this inquiry is exploring. For instance, Alison, the woman we know as Alison, had an undercover officer sleeping in her bed for about 4 to 5 years. That's extremely invasive, isn't it?
Absolutely. And forgive me, I have to reiterate to you, yes, that's extremely invasive, but I knew nothing about it.
In terms of protecting the women from this invasive tactic, they couldn't protect themselves because they didn't know anything about that policing, those policing operations. But you had the responsibility, didn't you, to protect those members of the public from officers engaging in sexual relationships. That's on the management of the SDS, isn't it? To take steps to protect the women from this sort of activity.
But that's presupposing that we knew that officers would engage in that activity. They were never told not to have any sexual relationships. But they were never, ever encouraged that they should have sexual relationships. Now that is absolutely, we would never have said that to anybody. Whatever anybody else has said, no one would have been permitted to have had a sexual relationship with anybody.
Is it fair to say that it didn't require you to know the sex was happening in order to be able to put measures in place to prevent it from happening, in the same way that it didn't require you to know that an officer was acting as an agent provocateur in order for there to be measures in place and a policy in place to prevent that from happening? Do you see what I'm saying? It didn't require you to know that an officer was having sex before you did anything about it. Your duty was to put in place measures to prevent it from happening, even if you thought it might never happen.
There was something written about agent provocateur. There was nothing written that I can recall about having sex while you're undercover. Even that sort of sex that was just fleeting and definitely, absolutely, definitely not in any way to be used to gain, officially, to be used to gain access to intelligence.
What do you mean by officially?
Well, what I'm saying is nobody that I'm aware of would ever have said it's quite all right to have sex with somebody if you're going to get closer to them to get the intelligence that we want. That would never have happened. That's what I mean by official. What is missing, and you've highlighted it, and I've agreed, is that there was a line that said agent provocateur, but there was no line to say not to have sex. And I accept that.
In terms of there being a line, shouldn't there have been a whole part of the training on this very, very serious part of a deployment? This is a big issue, isn't it? And it's one of the key issues that has really seized the undercover officers and has caused a lot of pain and heartache for a lot of people. The ripple effect of this is huge, isn't it? It's not about having one line in a policy document. It's about having a whole policy on it, a whole training session on it, reiterating it, making a massive part of the SDS management requirement to prevent these relationships and behaviour from happening.
I can only say yes now, in hindsight. I don't quite know how the training would have taken place, but there certainly would have been now. I can see why you're saying there should have been something, not just a line as well, of course, not a line.
Baron Condon, in his witness statement, it's at paragraph 17 of his witness statement, so I don't need to bring it up, but the quote is, "Bad behaviour is human weakness plus opportunity." Because officers would have had opportunity, strong, clear guidance on ethical matters was essential. Do you agree with that sentiment that Baron Condon has set out in his witness statement?
Yes, I do.
Do you accept that the young officers that you had under your direction being put into groups to socialise, to make relationships with the people there, in situations that, in social groups, it often involved alcohol, sometimes drugs, the thought that they could behave with immunity and impunity was irresistible, wasn't it, to some of the young men that you were in charge of?
I have to say, I don't see it in the way that you're saying. I'd like to think that after all, they were police officers. They were in a profession which really should have integrity. So, yes, these things have happened and shouldn't have happened, but I'm struggling here to see how best we could go about having had those training sessions, as you put it.
In terms
Sorry,
of...
let me people tell me I shouldn't keep talking at times, but I'm just going to say, that when you talk about training, if what you're thinking, I'm trying to work out how we could have a formal training session. But yes, in hindsight, I can now see that we could have had the opportunity to sit down with officers before they go out and go through a number of the scenarios they might have faced. Now, I think we did that largely, but I'm accepting that we did not touch on the opportunity for sexual activity. I'm accepting that. Was
one of the scenarios that was used a scenario where an activist was taken home, driven home, and offered the officer to come in for a cup of coffee, and things became a little bit close? Was that one of the scenarios that you're talking about?
I don't remember that, but I have subsequently, as a result of this inquiry, I've read something along those lines. That's all I can say on that.
And so was it contemplated that that might be a scenario that an officer would face?
The way I've read that, then that's obviously something that somebody had given thought to, and then in their discussion. And going back to what I've just said, I know I should stop talking sometimes, I keep saying, but had we had that type of training, then we could have had that discussion with them, introducing that area. I do accept that. But
you didn't contemplate it during
No.
your management time?
No.
In terms of the Tradecraft Manual, this is at 05275597 at page 27. Paragraph 5.6 is entitled Sexual Liaison, so there is something written.
Okay.
This is in the Tradecraft Manual, and we understand that this part was written by HN2 Andy Coles. So it does address the issue of romantic entanglements as set out here. And while it is not my place to moralise at the end of paragraph 5.6.1, one should try to avoid the opposite sex for as long as possible. It's recognised there that this subject is the cause of much soul-searching and concern. Were you aware that officers under your management were having conversations about sex undercover?
No.
That this did engage a lot of their concerns?
Certainly not at the time, no. And I've learned all about this as a result of this inquiry.
It does say here that in the past, emotional ties to the opposition have happened and caused all sorts of difficulties, including divorce, deception and disciplinary charges. Were you aware of those things that had happened in the past?
No.
When you read this, had you read this?
Well, I'm just trying to think.
Yeah. Would that have been something that you would have wanted to find out more about?
If and when I saw that, then yes, I perhaps should have taken, but more cognizance of it. And I'm told that it was, if I'm right, this was Andy Coles writing something, and therefore that would offered to put into accompany the tradecraft. But when I was first shown it, some years ago, perhaps now, I believe it was the first time I'd actually seen it. And that's an odd thing to say, but that was my recollection at the time. But so that's the first thing. The other thing is, yes, I was unaware of divorce, deception and discipline, but although I believe there was one officer way back. But I'm getting confused over this. So I'm going to be careful how I interpret what I'm reading and what you're asking of me.
Just before we break for lunch, I just want to draw your attention to 5.6.3. Can we have the whole paragraph up, please? And over the page. Do you see it's trying to say that while you may try to avoid any sexual encounter, there may come a time when your lack of interest may become suspicious.
I do see that.
And it talks about introducing an appropriate male or female from your own relations, or ask the back office if they can help with an operative. Both options fraught with difficulty. You have to make your own mind up about how to proceed. It's putting the burden on the UCO themselves, isn't it?
It is.
If you have no other option but to become involved with a weary, you should try to have fleeting, disastrous relationships with individuals who are not important to your source of information. And one cannot be involved with a weary in a relationship for any period of time without risking serious consequences. It's talking about, it's in the plural as well, isn't it, about having relationships, fleeting, disastrous relationships with individuals. That is something that suggests sex undercover is something that you can try and avoid, but it may come to the point where you have to have a few of these relationships. Do you accept that that's what it's inferring?
Well, if he's referring to sexual relationships, then I can see that. But there are other relationships, and you can fall out with people and perhaps cause.
I think this is under the heading sexual liaisons.
And I'd say I saw this when it was presented to me. I don't recall it, but that would have caused me some concern reading it in that way.
Okay.
I could honestly say that.
Okay. Thank you. So that may be a time to break for lunch.
Yeah. We'll resume at 2.